It's like a family photo.
Oh. Boże, morto duo.
Hello, I am back after a long break from YouTube. For those that are new, I'm Ben. I've been living in Albania for a bit over 2 years now, and I mostly post videos about my experience here in Albania and the many beautiful places I visited. And today I'm going to share with you what I consider to be the best 2-week itinerary during your first visit to Albania. This is the same itinerary I brought my parents on during their first trip to Albania last June. There are just 2 disclaimers to mention. First, this trip is best during the warmer months. And second, you really need to rent a car to fully experience it. Anyways, let's get right to the video. After my parents spent their first night in Tirana, we began our trip by driving up north. We were headed to Theth, a beautiful and peaceful village about 5 hours north of Tirana. Since we wanted my parents to visit their first Albanian castle on the way, we made a quick stop at Rozafa castle in Shkodra. I've already made a few videos in Shkodra, so you can check out those videos on my channel if you're interested in this city and Rozafa castle. But the castle is definitely worth a visit. You can go to hear about the legend of Rozafa and also get a beautiful view from the castle overlooking Shkodra. Anyways, after a very quick visit, it was time to get to the village of Theth. The road to Theth is, it's quite bumpy. Actually, it used to be much more dangerous and scary about 3 years ago, but they have been working on paving and widening the road since. That being said, there is still about a 20-kilometer section that is unpaved. It's much safer than it used to be, but still I'd recommend at least an SUV because of the bumps. Or even better, you can hire a driver to take you from Shkodra, which is not only safer but also completely necessary if you're doing the hike across to Valbona, as we will in the next video. As you can see, there was still a good amount of snow during the drive, despite it being June. The views along this drive are really beautiful, especially as you begin dipping down into Theth Valley. Eventually we arrived. There are a ton of nice guest houses in Theth, and this one we stayed at is called Mrizi. This guest house actually just opened a couple years ago, but they've already proven to have really great hospitality, fresh food, friendly owners, and the best part, their beautiful suites which have amazing views of the Albanian Alps. It's definitely the perfect place to spend a long, peaceful weekend away from the city. Alright, so let's show you what you can do when visiting the beautiful village of Theth. I'm actually here with Fee and her family, and my parents came from the US last night, so within 24 hours we've already made it to what I think is one of the most beautiful places in Albania. So first, I'd recommend just taking some time to wander around the village. Take a walk to the Tower of Nicol Koceku, otherwise known as the Defense Tower or the Lock-in Tower. If you're interested in the history of the Northern Highlands of Albania, this is a must visit. Here you can pay just €1 to have Sokol, a descendant of the Koceku family, give you the history of the tower and explain the set of laws governing this area at the time. Back in the day, this code of laws was called the Kanun. Historically, the tower was used both as a prison for those who had been accused of violating the Kanun, as well as a sort of place of mediation and reconciliation for the families of the offender and the offended. Here, Fee translates Sokol as he tells us a bit about the tower and its historical significance, as well as about the Kanun. I'll just show you the first few minutes, but it was really interesting and worth going to hear about.
We will tell the story of this tower.
Ka 4 shekuj që është ndërtuar si kull.
4 centuries that it has been built as a tower.
Ka funksionuar për 3 shekuj për pajtime.
For 3 of the centuries it has worked to bring the people together, the ones from the blood feuds.
Ka 1 shekull që nuk funksionon sepse kanuni i Gjirokastrit nuk ekziston tjetër.
But it's been a century that it hasn't been working because the Kanun of Gjirokastrit that I told you, the book, it's illegal now for the last 100 years, so it doesn't work.
Fjala kanun vjen nga fjala latinisht ligj dhe është shtyr nga bota kushtetut për kohën e kaluar.
The word kanun, that is called Kanun of Gjirokastrit, comes from the word constitution, and it's known as an unwritten constitution from back then.
Por lind pyetja pse quhet kull ngujimit kur shku pajtimit.
But the question arises, like, why is it called Kunguim? Is like a cool of like the hiding, when it's actually a cool of like forgiveness, like bringing people together.
The tower also has extremely tiny windows, and as you can imagine, this was for protection and defense. After Sokol explained the history of the tower, he played us some music using only a blade of grass. We then left the lock-in tower after a really informative experience. Afterwards, you can make your way to the Church of Theth, which was built back in 1892. I absolutely love it here in Theth. Theth is unlike any place that I visited, and I think it's incredibly peaceful here. Now the next day, it was time to visit Syri Kalter, or the Blue Eye of Theth. The most common way to get to Blue Eye is to drive from Theth village to a starting point and then take about an hour to an hour and a half hike. However, some people do hike all the way from Theth village instead, which might take about 3 to 3.5 hours one way.
Good morning. We just finished an amazing breakfast at Mrizi.
Now we're on a drive to Syri Kalter, which is the Blue Eye of Theth.
How's your second day in Albania?
Guess what?
How are you enjoying Albania so
It's
far?
outstanding.
Honestly, although I would recommend the drive, it's really not for the faint-hearted. I would definitely recommend you arrange a driver with your guest house since they have a lot of experience driving these roads. It's about a 30 to 40 minute drive to the beginning of the hike, but the road is unpaved and on a pretty steep ledge for the majority of the time. I'm not trying to scare you, it's actually really beautiful, but just for those who are scared of heights, it's probably good to sit on the inside seat. The driver will drop you off at restaurant Lulash Zelna, where you'll start the hike. The hike is not too difficult, at least compared to the long hike we'll do the next day.
It's about a 1 hour hike from here, so we'll do the hike, hopefully do some swimming there, and then head back for lunch in this nice restaurant by this nice little river.
Welcome to Blue Eye. Now, if you're lucky, you'll arrive at the Blue Eye when it's relatively empty, like we did here. Not too many people swim at this Blue Eye, even in June, and that is because the water is quite freezing actually. Most people just sit at this little makeshift outdoor cafe and have a drink or just hang out around the Blue Eye and relax. Anyways, we eventually hiked back and sat for lunch at this restaurant beside the river before heading back to Theth village.
So that's it for Theth, a truly must-visit place in Albania. After a second night in Theth, we woke up early to begin our hike to Valbona.
It's usually about 8 hours from the starting point. I believe around 15 kilometers. But right now it's still considered early season and there's still quite a bit of snow. So we have a guide with us who will help us through this more dangerous section of the hike.
The Theth Valbona hike is a very popular route as it connects these two must-visit places in northern Albania. The hike is generally not too difficult. It's usually recommended to have a medium fitness level. However, it really depends on the season. As you'll see soon, the hiking season started very late this year. There was still a huge amount of snow on the Valbona side in mid-June, making the hike much more technical and dangerous. Here we reached the midpoint of the hike, not really having much trouble because we hadn't encountered much snow yet.
How you doing?
Good. So, been fun. Good hike.
Good hike.
Yes.
It wasn't until we started descending down to Valbona that the conditions really worsened. If you're thinking about doing this hike early in the season or late in the season, I would 100% recommend that you contact your guest house in Theth and in Valbona. That way they can give you accurate information on the conditions of the hike and whether they would recommend it or not.
So when we were booking this trip to Theth, and we asked around a lot about the hike from Theth to Valbona, we were warned about the snow because it seems like the season is starting a bit late. And the two issues mainly with the snow is that one, obviously it's slippery, but the second is that there are some holes that sink and you have a risk of, you know, falling a little into them, and you don't know where it will sink.
And you have slidden, but your mother has stayed upright.
My dad and I, we've been sliding a bit, and that's why it's essential that we have a guide with us. It's still doable. I mean, my parents are managing, though if you want a safer option, obviously wait a little bit further into the summer, maybe early July, you know, up until September. So hopefully we'll be getting close to Valbona in a couple hours. Little break from the snow finally.
I'm really happy that we went for it and it was a beautiful hike. But yeah, I would definitely recommend waiting depending on the conditions of the season. So I just want to give you some general tips for this hike. First, a guide is optional. It's really up to you. We were safe to hire one given the conditions, though during the peak season, it's really just a matter if you think a guide would make you feel more comfortable or give you more info about the trail. Second, there are ways to make this hike a bit shorter. Basically, on both sides of the hike, from Theth and from Valbona, you can hire a driver to take you to a starting point. This can shorten your hike by a couple hours rather than beginning and ending your hike directly from your guest houses in Theth and Valbona. And lastly, there are some cafes along the way. You should probably bring a packed meal from your guest house since it will be 6 hours at the very minimum. However, there are places to stop for drinks, coffee, etc. on both the Theth side and the Valbona side of the hike.
You got it. Taking the hard option, there you go. We are just finishing up the Theth to Valbona hike. We're about to arrive on the pavement road. Then we just have a short walk to our hotel.
So here we finally arrived at the road in Valbona, and we walked the last 30 minutes or so to our guest house. Generally, the guest houses in Valbona are a bit more spread out than in Theth, though there are still a ton of good options. We stayed at Koljalni, which is a family-run guest house that is really cozy and peaceful. The views from the guest house were also really incredible, and the food was really tasty as well. And that's it for our time in Theth and Valbona.
That hike was intense, really just because of the amount of snow. Next, it was time to take the ferry before driving to Mrizi, Zanave, a really incredible agrotourism spot near Plazhi.
Good morning. We just had a cozy night in Valbona. My parents are enjoying their time in North Albania so far, and I'm excited to show them Tirana for a couple days as well, and then head down south to the beautiful beaches.
For the Komani Lake ferry, we drove about 40 minutes from Valbona to the ferry terminal in Fierza. The ferry ride is not only incredibly scenic, but it also is convenient if you're doing the hike from Theth to Valbona. The ferry brings you from Fierza to Komani, and it takes about an hour and a half. From there, you can arrange a shuttle or private car to Shkodra or Tirana, which you can organize with the ferry company. We went with a company called Ferry Berisha. They go from Komen to Fierza every day at 9 a.m. and then from Fierza to Komen every day at 1 p.m. We really enjoyed the ferry ride. The lake has a beautiful turquoise color to it, and it looked amazing with the rolling mountains in the background. I would highly recommend it. When we arrived at the Komen ferry terminal, we had a private car take us straight to Mrizi Zanave, about an hour and a half drive. We had arranged this with Ferry Berisha in advance. Here we arrive at Mrizi Zanave. In my opinion, this is the most unique restaurant and hotel in the whole country. It's located in the village of Fishta in the city of Lezhë, and it's a place I always recommend to foreigners visiting Albania for the first time. And that's because of their beautiful architecture, their great hospitality, and their creative and tasty Albanian dishes.
These are pickles, olives. They like pickle a lot of things here. Then you have a barek, a liqueur, maybe 2 bareks and a liqueur, and then
Oh, and the wine.
and wine.
This was some sort of fried zucchini, some tomatoes, potatoes, as well as a really nice blueberry pasta.
Who would have thought to put this together?
Then we also had some meat dishes and a lot of really creative desserts.
So what are you shaking on there?
The coffee beans, right? We got Rose.
Ooh.
What I love most about this place is that they always change up their dishes based on the season.
Thank you.
Enjoy it.
Thank you very much.
Afterwards, we took a walk to Mrizi's production center. I have a longer video at Mrizi that gives an in-depth look at the production center, so you can check that out if you're interested in how they make and source their products, including their wine, their cheese, and their meats.
Here is cheese with wine. In here too.
Smells wonderful.
That's crazy.
The next morning, we had an early breakfast, and once again, I was surprised by the spread of creative and fresh dishes. Unfortunately, it was time to leave Mrizi, but we had a ton of exciting plans for later in the day. Our first stop was to head to Zadrima, a neighboring village to Mrizi, to shop from some of the talented artisans in the area. We visited Art Zadrima first, which has some beautiful handcrafted ceramics. After shopping here for a bit, we moved on to Ceramic Vasili, another family-run ceramic studio that has plenty of beautiful designs.
Like years is a little better.
Then it was time to make our way to the historic town of Kruja. Here, my parents visited the Skanderbeg Museum, which gives an in-depth look of the Albanian hero Skanderbeg, as well as Albania's resistance against the Ottoman Empire. If you're interested in Kruja, I have a much more detailed video from there as well.
That was the Skanderbeg Museum.
Yeah, it's a great history of ancient Albania. I really enjoyed learning about the resistance.
Awesome. Time to shop, yeah?
Next, we continued shopping at Pasqyrave, the old bazaar of Kruja. This spot is full of beautiful souvenirs, so it's definitely worth visiting, especially if you're looking to shop for gifts.
You like it's olive wood, everything? You have
Yeah, what is this wood?
olive wood.
Olive wood.
Everything, olive wood.
I love it.
You have plate for,
Yeah.
you have for meat, for fish. You have, excuse me, antipas bigger. This is for salad. You have
So much.
You have four versions. You have chest for fruits.
We left here with plenty of rugs, carvings, among other things.
Let's got all the souvenirs.
Useful ones, yeah.
And that is it for our time in the north.
Right here marks the midpoint of our trip. Here we spent 2 nights in Tirana, where my parents can finally explore and relax a bit in the capital city. I have too many recommendations for what to do in Tirana, but to mention a few things we did, we went to Bankart 2 Museum. We went to the House of Leaves, which is the Museum of Secret Surveillance, and some really good restaurants, including Serena's Meshehu. Now, after some rest, it was time to start heading south. We started by going to Berat, which is about 2 hours drive from Tirana.
Where are we going?
Nowhere fast.
The south. The south.
The gang is here in Berat.
Expectations?
Big.
Awesome. Can't wait to see.
As soon as we arrived in Berat, we headed to Dhermi Albanian Food, a family-run restaurant in the Berat castle, to have a great traditional meal.
For guests,
Moussaka,
moussaka and a Greek salad. Correct me kangu, right?
mekungu.
Me kangu. We got spetset and busher.
It's just like one. I like this kind of direct.
Cake. Strawberry jam.
It's very good, huh?
Oh, man.
After this perfect meal, we explored the huge castle a bit more. There are some really beautiful viewpoints from the castle, including one here, which overlooks Berat. If you visit here, you should spend a while exploring the castle. The first structures of the castle were built in the 4th century BC, and it has a total of 24 watchtowers.
Oh, they're so cute.
Highlights of Berat.
That just came off the tray.
But
Oh,
that's karma, right?
that's a low light of Berat.
You can walk down to the Holy Trinity Church, check out the ethnographic museum, and just explore the many alleyways. Many people still have their homes within the fortress, and there are also many restaurants, cafes, and churches within the castle walls.
So we're gonna head to our hotel and then do a wine tour tonight. So
Where should we put him? In that area with the. Ooh, it's scared.
Afterwards, we checked into our hotel in Berat before driving out to Roshnik.
Oh, this is cool too, huh?
I like this one.
We drove about 30 minutes from Berat to Alpeta Agrotourism, a restaurant, winery, and guest house that offers wine and raki tours, as well as incredibly fresh food. One of the owner's sons, Elio, gave us a tour around Alpeta.
The reason why we started this kind of business was my grandfather, who had studied for agriculture in Tirana. The first time that he had a chance to produce some grapes and to produce some wine, he used it, and it was exactly after the communism. He treated all the wild grapes like this one here. Here is one of wild grapes that goes around the tree. Something you should know about the village is that here can be produced like all culture, fruit and vegetables, but people are focused mostly on grapes, olives and figs. We produce wine by grapes and raki, of course. We produce olive oil from the olive trees, and we dry the figs during September to August to September, and after the people sell it.
Walking around the vineyards and learning more about the beginning of Alpeta was a really special experience. We spent some time exploring their property before going to see how they make their raki. Elio and his father tell us more about the raki making process here.
When you purchase rakis?
Here is the place when we produce raki. So the traditional drink of Albanians is raki since very old. Here is the time when we put the fermented grapes. After this is the upper part that it can be removed, and after we can put all part of the grapes inside. the fermented one. The grape needs about 2 weeks, maybe sometimes a little more to get fermented, because the fermentation here happens only naturally. And the optimal temperature is about 16 to 20 degrees. After we put all the mass of grapes, fermented one, we turn on the fire there. We isolate all the parts. When it starts to boil, the alcohol came here as a steam in this tube. This tank is full of hot water, and you will have a condensation. And the raki comes here as a liquid. In very first time it's about 70% alcohol, and after it takes some like parts of the grape, like juice or humidity, and it gets down, and in average we put in the bottle like 46% raki. We are not using only for ourselves. All the neighbors, all the people that live here around, our friends, came to use our place for producing raki and taking their home.
Afterwards, we headed to their winemaking cellar, where they produce wine out of Poulis grapes, which only grow in this region. They also make red wine as well.
In our family business, we work like as a family. So my father and my uncle, so they have taken care from their parents for everything here to go right. And after they doing the same with us, with their children. And now we, as he have worked in this business like before, now the new generation are doing the same here. So as I said, we are from familiar winery. We are not exporting like to produce too much to sell it. But something that you know is that we do it most often. Most of things here are done by hands, and everything is organic, and we don't put everything.
Then we finally got to taste some of this delicious wine and raki.
Cheers. Ooh, cheers.
I like it.
Yeah, me too.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add because I don't really drink wine. So.
Is it good or bad?
It's awesome.
Okay, there you go. Awesome. Fee?
I love this.
You look like you know how to wine taste.
Yeah, I pretend.
See, she holds it with her pinky out. That's how you know.
Dry figs and nuts.
Oh,
bless.
Yeah.
Some cheese.
We later had a dinner while wine and raki tasting, including cheese, fresh Berat, beetroots, and olives.
It's a muscat grapes. It's like a really good grapes for a kid.
Now, in addition to drinking the raki, the owner taught us the traditional customs of giving toasts, including the order of the toasts for the host and the guests.
Thank you for coming here.
Dhe këtë shëndetin e parë do ta pi për mirëseardhjen tuaj në Roshnik.
The first I was going to be drinking for coming here and saying welcome.
So he's saying this word to me, and we're drinking this health for you too.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, this is so good.
So it's a story behind the preparation of the raki.
The owner also told us an old story about two friends who one day didn't have any cups for their raki, so they used peppers instead. So here we had a lot of fun doing the same thing.
And now he is going to drink for your son.
Do t'ju uroja djalit tem të programi që ka të ketë sukses dhe të ecën përpara.
He would wish your son too much success and to go just straight.
No, it's for you.
Thank you.
Dhe unë me babën ati, këto gotat pijem kështu.
Film that.
Oh, Jay.
Thank you.
But do we drink at the
Hotel
same
Moira
time?
Kia.
No.
Hotel Moira Kia.
If it sounds strong, just sip. Just
Gazuar, Promotra, and Tua.
Faleminderit! Faleminderit!
I drink to you and your success and your family, and wish you and your family all the best as you continue to make great products like you do. You're excellent, and it's a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Ta gëzosh!
Që sa bukur. Ta gëzosh, të flesh shëndetin.
Ta gëzoj.
Thank
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We headed back to Berat after a really unique and fun experience at Alpeta. The next morning, we spent a few hours wandering Berat. We walked along the bridge and just admired the Ottoman-style houses along the hills.
After a great time in Berat, it was time to head to Gjirokastra, which is known as the Stone City. And afterwards, it was time to head to Albania's beautiful coastline.
After driving about 2 hours from Berat to Gjirokastra, we had to try some of Gjirokastra's most famous traditional dishes. We had some burek and chofta, though also tasted some dishes unique to Gjirokastra. This one here is called chifchi, and the dessert is called oshaf, which is made of sheep milk, sugar, and figs.
Really good.
Then we wandered the streets of the old bazaar. After doing some shopping in the bazaar, it was time to get a glimpse of Gjirokastra's history. We first headed to the Zekate house, which was built in 1812.
Hello, pup. Hello, pup. Hey, buddy.
This house is an example of the usual tower houses built for the wealthiest families in Gjirokastra during the 19th century. The house belongs to Beqir Zeko, who was one of Ali Pasha's general administrators at the time. The house is 3 stories and has twin towers, and the interior is truly amazing and gives you a glimpse of the Ottoman-style architecture. There's also a beautiful view overlooking Gjirokastra from the top. Afterwards, we headed to a must-visit site when visiting Gjirokastra. I talk about the castle a bit more in depth in my previous video in Gjirokastra, but to recap some highlights, the first fortresses were built as early as the 12th century. The castle is one of the biggest in the Balkans, and it's frequently visited because of its rich history. You can go to check out the clock tower, the stage that was used for festivals, and the views of Gjirokastra from above. It's also interesting to visit to hear about the castle's significance under Ali Pasha in the 19th century and King Zog in the 20th century. Definitely stop here when in Gjirokastra. Later we headed out for dinner and afterwards got a taste of Gjirokastra's nightlife. It's pretty common that Gjirokastra hosts festivals and events during the weekends, and they're very fun to experience in the streets of the bazaar.
Good morning. We just spent 2 nights in Gjirokastra. We're going to head to Saranda in just a bit, but before we do so, we're going to go on a nice drive around the old town with Experience Gjirokastra. Are you liking Gjirokastra?
Loving it.
Awesome. It's the best.
It's the best?
We're having a great time.
I thought Berat was the best.
Well, everything, we keep topping things every place that we go. I expect the next place to be even better than this.
Yeah.
I mean, what a country.
Yeah.
What a country.
So much enthusiasm.
It's unbelievable.
After our drive around Gjirokastra, it was time to head to the coast. Our next destination was Saranda, though we made a quick stop at the Blue Eye on the way.
So last time we were here was in March of this year, and the scenery was very different. So the Blue Eye is very, very beautiful, but at this time of the year, in June, it's a little bit crowded because you see a lot of tourists. But it's still beautiful and worth stopping by.
Yeah, I mean, it's really nice, but the difference between the Blue Eye and Theth and the Blue Eye and Saranda is the Blue Eye and Theth is actually hard to get to, whereas here you can just sort of drive up and walk 1 minute. So.
Yes.
But it's very cool nonetheless, so worth a stop from, you know, on the way to Saranda, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes.
After this quick stop, we made it to Saranda. Last time Fee and I were in Saranda in March, we stayed at Hotel Nurtili. And we really enjoyed our time there, so we thought it would be the perfect spot to have my parents stay. After checking in, we wandered the streets of Saranda a bit. We had our first taste of seafood at a restaurant called Mangiarane, which never disappoints. Before exploring some of Saranda's best beaches, we drove down to the ancient city of Butrint, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now it stands as an archaeological site where the ruins represent how the city was developed and redeveloped throughout different eras.
After exploring Butrint, we headed to my parents' first Albanian beach. We went to Mir Beach, which is located on the southern end of Saranda, close to Ksamil. Here we enjoyed a swim before heading back to Hotel Nurtili for sunset.
That was nice.
The next morning, we visited the beaches of Ksamil before driving up the coast. Ksamil has a long stretch of beaches, and we decided to just spend a few hours relaxing on probably the most popular one, Ksamil Beach.
And he's off.
And for the last stretch of this trip, with plenty of stops, it was time to drive slowly up the coastline to Dhermi. This coastline is really incredible with so many notable stops along the way. First, we went up to somewhere that is a bit less well known, and that is the old town of Shpella, about 20 minutes drive up into the hills. It's a beautiful town to see just as a quick stop before heading back down to the coast. Then a bit further up the coast, we stopped at Ali Pasha Castle in Porto Palermo, a really beautiful castle in a bay. You can pay a little bit of money to get a nice tour here or otherwise wander and explore yourself. I think I included a tour of this a bit more in a previous video.
They say kitchen room, but it's like the harem room, which means like they eat, they drink, they dance, and he had like 25 girls dancing.
Harem is in Albania. Albanian is triple, so this kitchen, dancing and drinking, 25
Yeah,
dancing.
just like our kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is their private balcony.
Then we stopped in Hamara, which is a coastal town that's definitely worth a stop. Afterwards, we went up to Dhermi, where we would be spending the next 2 nights. After one night here, we organized a boat tour to see some of Albania's hidden beaches and caves. The whole tour took about 6 hours, and I'll mention some of the places that we stopped, including my favorites, Grama Bay and Gjirokastra. For the first stop, Shkodra Bay, we stayed on the boat, but it's a really nice view with beautiful water. Next, we had a quick visit to the Blue Cave, the first of 2 caves that we visited during this trip. After that, we went to Grama Bay, which is really only accessible by boat or else an extremely long hike. On the side of the beach, you can actually see over 1,000 old rock inscriptions, which is quite cool. Here you can also hike about 30 minutes to get a really nice view of the beach. After that, we went to the Pirate's Cave. Finally, Shpella and Pellumbave and Gjirokastra Beach, before heading back to Dhermi. In Dhermi, we just hung out in Dramatis for the sunrise, relaxing end to an incredible day. next morning, we left Dhermi and drove through the incredible Vlora Pass, a drive with amazing views of the coastline. We also stopped for one of my favorite dishes, Ksamil, which is yogurt with honey and walnuts. Trust me, in Vlora it's definitely worth a stop to try this. Finally, we had one more stop in Vlora, a very popular and relatively big coastal city. Then we stopped at Taverna for a final meal in the south, which is about a 30-minute drive above Vlora in the town Panaya. Here, my parents tried dal for the first time, which is a yogurty drink.
Well, like a rocky soup.
Oh, yes.
Different.
And that's it for this really fun trip. My parents had a final night in Tirana before flying out the next morning. This is really my favorite itinerary for someone's first time in Albania, as you really get a taste of Albania's beautiful mountains, cultural cities, and beaches. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye.